Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Welcome to the second panel of this conference, which is entitled Historical Perspectives. My name is Olesya Khromoychuk. I have been teaching here at Cambridge for a while, and I'm about to take up a fellowship at the University of East Anglia. And I will introduce the speakers in the order they appear in the program. They chose to sit in the audience hall so they can see the slides. That is why they don't appear here. We have more than one speaker in this panel, I assure you. And our first speaker is Lukasz Adamski, who is a historian and political scientist who specializes in the history of political thought in Central and Eastern Europe and in the domestic and foreign policies of Russia and Ukraine. He is research project supervisor at the Polish-Russian Center for Dialogue and Understanding in Warsaw. He's the author of the monograph, Progressive Nationalist Mikhailo Hrushevsky and His Views on Poland and the Poles, which was published in 2011. So, Lukasz, you have 17 and a half minutes, I was told. Okay.
And good afternoon. Good afternoon. First, I would like to thank very cordially to the organizers for invitation. And secondly, I would like to declare that I will do all my best to turn your attention during this 17 and a half minutes. After lunch break, I think it will be, it's quite perhaps good that although we have panel discussion, at the beginning of this panel discussion we could see also some slides with some interesting pictures. I like provoke, so some people call me provocator, and actually also the subject of this presentation is also a kind of provocation, since I would like to underline that Polish-Ukrainian dialogue, Polish-Ukrainian reconciliation should not be limited to Kultura, to this famous Polish emigrant journal, to Jerzy Giedroyć, his editor, and other members of the Kultura staff, but this idea of Polish-Ukrainian dialogue has some predecessors. And I also don't want to speak about Piłsudski and Petlura, since it is quite obvious. Therefore, I will come back even more into the 19th century. And at the beginning, I would like to just to sketch some, let's say, frameworks and some to share with you some introductory remarks. So, firstly, there are two notions: Polish-Ruthenian relations and Polish-Ukrainian relations, which are not the same. I would say Polish-Ruthenian relations is something more than Polish-Ukrainian, since for me at least, the Ukrainians means also the nation, or at least people with strong Ukrainian identity, whereas Ruthenians is a broader concept, which include also representatives of so-called Muscophilism, or so people with, let's say, pan-Russian identity, or some intellectuals who considered themselves to be gente Ruteni natione Polonii, so in other words, people, Polish nationals and Ruthenians by origin. Secondly, Polish-Ukrainian relations were asymmetrical in this period. Asymmetrical in the sense that the subject of these relations were different. On the one hand, we had a political nation which was defined as political nation not only by themselves but also by international law. And concretely, I would like to refer to the final act of Vienna Congress, which prescribed that, at least it might be interpreted in this way, that all population of the former Commonwealth, subjects of Russian Emperor, King of Prussia, and Emperor of Austria, are Polish nationals. So on the one hand, we have this strong community, political community, also ethnic community, with definitely recognized as political community. On the other hand, we had a nation in the building process, and in the most decades of 19th century limited to influential circles of intellectuals, but not to the broad masses. Thirdly, Ukrainian nation-building process might be, from the Polish perspective, treated as opposition toward the concept of this Polish political nation in 1772 borders. If I may provoke you even more, I would say that from the Polish perspective, or from the perspective of the 19th century Poles, Ukrainian movement was treated as a separatist movement. People who should have felt as the Poles, but from different reasons, they decided not to be Poles. So it's not my perspective, I underline once again, but it was this perspective which came across through different opinions and trends of the Polish political thought. But last point is that in the Polish political thought, Ruthenia, today's Ukraine, was clearly identified as something separate from, let's say, proper Russia. So Ruthenia was not Russia. Ruthenian was not Rosyjski, Russian. It is, we can find collaboration of this thesis when we look at a dictionary of the Polish language, when we look at encyclopedias, Polish encyclopedias, which were published in 19th century, then in opposition to, let's say, British, Britannica, to a French encyclopedia, Ruthenians were treated as, or even Little Russians were treated as something separate from Russia. And here is, for example, an illustration of that. A book which was printed in Krakow in 1809, and it's history of remote nations which are under Russian authorities. Crimeans, Tatars, here's Crimean Tatars, and Cossacks. Although population of right bank Ukraine, as I already mentioned, was very often treated as political Poles, then population and elites of the former Hetmanate were treated as separate nations, Little Russian nation or Cossack nations. The point, when we want to answer the question who actually started the idea of dialogue with Ukrainians, then I have to say that it was not, let's say, Polish revolutionaries or Polish leftist forces. They were supporters of the like French Republicans of the concept of one single Polish political nation. It was rather Polish conservatives, and here I would like to mention the factual leader, also spiritual leader, but also a political leader of the conservatives, Adam Jerzy Czartoryski. In 1845. He wrote, I will write Polish and then I try to translate it in English. Jest w naszym kraju milionami liczona część mieszkańców, przeciw którym niektórzy z nas mają niesłuszne uprzedzenia. Usunąć je, uleczyć się z nich jest czynem powinnym i koniecznym. Na Rusinów spadły najsroższe prześladowania naszego ciemiężcy i oni na wielu miejscach okazali stałość godną męczenników. Rusini, równie jak Litwini, są naszymi braćmi i jednym narodem. So there is a certain inhabitant in our country against whom some other Poles have different stereotypes. Czartoryski called for removing stereotypes and for, let's say, empathy towards Ruthenians who suffered even more than, let's say, Poles from the Kingdom of Poland, so from this autonomous part of the Russian Empire. But Czartoryski was, I would say, his position was in the middle. So he recognized some distinctive features of Ruthenians, but still for them, Ruthenians should be treated as a part of this broader Polish political nation. But his collaborator Jakub Jaworski wrote in 1846 a polemics or political treaty in which he called for recognition of the separate Ukrainian identity, Ruthenian identity, on the both banks of Dnieper River. So not only he even wrote that jeżeli te prowincje w przyszłej rewolucji będą opuszczone, left bank Ukraine, former hetmanate, so if these provinces, the Poles would not include in their political consideration, then they will never return to Poland. And he added, nie wiem jak daleko Polska po wyrzeczeniu się swoich dzieci swe granice pociągnie, ale to jedno wiem, że bez zająknienia się mogę powiedzieć, że Polska od wschodu nigdy zapewniona nie będzie. Lud tych prowincji zrzuci więcej jak pewno sam jarzmo swojej niewoli i zostanie państwem oddzielnym, niepodległym i może daleko na wschód rozszerzy swoje granice. So he said that population of these provinces, if it is not encompassed, covered by Polish independence movement and independence aspiration, or in other even words, if the Poles would not aspire, if the Polish movement aspire only to the borders of Commonwealth from the year 1772, then these attempts would fail. For Jaworski, he pleaded for extension of the concepts towards Ruthenian, also to left bank Ukraine. 1863 might be considered from many as a turning point. Why? Because actually it was the recognition of Ruthenians as separate nations. Here it is a very famous gramota, a letter written to Ruthenian peasants, written in Ukrainian and in Polish language. Here we have, like Professor Frost also today, a coat of arms with Polish eagle, with Lithuanian Ritter, and with angel of Michael. This was idea of this was political concept of Polish insurgents from the year 1863. But during this insurgent, Polish revolutionary and underground government clearly recognized Ruthenians as something separate from the Poles. He actually, of course, he would prefer that Ruthenians create a federation or confederation with the resurrected Poland, but it was anyway not a part of it was not Polish people and or Ruthenian-speaking people a part of Polish nation, but something separate. And this recognition of Ruthenians as nations was done by so-called the whites, so by conservative supporters of a January uprising, which were at power in the spring 1863. Very briefly, what happened later? Krakow conservatives tried to. One moment, I'm not. Tried to continue Czartoryski idea and they tried to conduct dialogue with representatives of Ukrainian national movement, but it was only a part of the Polish rightist forces, whereas on the left side of the Polish political scene, there were even ideas to recognize Poland in ethnographic borders. It was Bolesław Wysłouch in 1880s. He was one of the leaders of let's say agrarian movement in Poland and quite influential publicist, columnist, and he clearly stated that the border of the future Polish and Ukrainian state should be San River, so like today. On the Ukrainian part of the story, as predecessors of Polish-Ukrainian dialogue, we might consider, of course, Taras Shevchenko and his very famous poem to the Poles. So, and that my Pole, my companion, my brother, is how greedily priests and magnates set us against ourselves and separated us. And we could have lived in harmony though. Lend a hand to the Cossack, open your heart to him, and together in the name of Christ, bring our peaceful heaven on earth back to life. But this is quite famous. Less famous is Platon Kostecki, who wrote in Latin letters a poem preach w imię Ojca i Syna to nasza modlitwa, jako Trójca tak jedyna, Polska, Rus i Litwa. So it was, let's say, a hymn of Jagiellonian idea, and Platon Kostecki was representative of a small minor group who considered themselves to be both Ruthenians and Poles. Here is something more, even more interesting, I think. It's also written in Polish letters, but it's also written in Ukrainian language, of course. And it is a paraphrase of the Polish national anthem. Szczeru świata nie propala, doki Rusy nie żywuć, що moskowska chytrość wzięła, se bulatom odberuć. So the holy Ruthenia, or holy Rus, has not perished yet, because the Ruthenians are living, and what Moscow greed took us away, then we should, with sable, take again. Professor Sisson today already mentioned Panteleimon Kulish, who was, I think, on the Ukrainian part, one of the only intellectual who went so far and who proposed reconciliation to the Poles, who proposed also some ideas how the reconciliation, how the dialogue might be implemented in practice. Okay, I know. Panteleimon Kulish appealed to the Poles as, let's say, a much more powerful community to have more empathy and more understanding for Ukrainians, but he also clearly condemned Cossack myth or Cossack history, this dominating among Ukrainian intelligentsia depiction of Ukrainian history as something which does not correspond to the historical truth. And he was actually the strongest, the man who strongly who condemned myth of Cossackdom in the most strongest way the Ukrainian intellectuals might imagine. Ivan Franko, but here I wouldn't also like to speak more because we have here probably the most eminent specialist on this topic, Professor Hrycak. So some conclusions. I think conducting Polish-Ruthenian or Polish-Ukrainian dialogue in the 19th century required that Poles had to recognize the subjectivity of Ukrainians as separate nation. So perhaps not this subjectivity, that Ruthenians are not Poles, are not political Poles. So this was the first conditions. And Polish conservatives were more eager to do it than Polish leftist forces, more addicted to the idea of French revolutions. Secondly, attempts of reconciliation were hampered by a radicalization of Polish and Ukrainian public opinion, by nationalization, which was particularly visible in the last 2 decades of the 19th century. The dominant Polish public opinion was not ready to recognize a rightful for self-determination of Ruthenia and of Ruthenian inhabitants. So they might recognize the subjectivity, but on the other hand, they demanded that Ruthenia should remain in a federation, or at least confederation, with reconstructed Poland, which of course Ukrainian did not want to accept. Fourthly, many Ukrainians, especially in the Russian Empire, were not, actually only in the Russian Empire, were not ready to denounce loyalty to the Russian Empire and to share aspiration of the Polish national movement. This was also a factor which impeded dialogue with the Poles. Of course, dominant Polish public opinion, and with few exceptions like Kulish, a representative of Ukrainian national movement, were not ready to overcome historical stereotypes and myths. And last but not least, my conclusion is that Jerzy Giedroyć and Kultura should not be treated as initiators of the Polish-Ukrainian dialogue and conversation about the past. And I think I have 1 minute left, so so I did my job.